Welcome back to week 11 of the DSR channel, and I'm trying to catch up before the next big expansion book comes out, Forge of the Artificer, which is in like 8 days. I'm trying to get finish ranking all of the feats from the player's handbook now, so that at least that's all out there and in the Google Drive before we start adding more to it with that book. Spells, that's just way too much to get to, so I'm not going to get to that before then. And I also want to try to finish all the roll part one of all the roll videos. So I'm going to try to do controller later today as well. So we'll get two today. All right, and today it's going to be the fighting styles from the player's handbook. So here's the ranks I'd give all of these. I've updated the CSV and the PDF in the Google Drive to now version 6. It's got all these added to it. So you can just get that latest and just look at these. And if you don't care why I rated these this way, you can stop right here. But a couple of interesting notes about fighting styles. First up, only fighter, paladins, and rangers get fighting styles as part of their class. Then there's the swords subclass for bards that gets a fighting style, and I can't think of any others. There's like a tickle in my brain that I'm missing one. Um, and I forget stuff all the time. So let me know which one I'm missing from the official WotC content. But then all of these fighting styles now have a prerequisite that you must already have a fighting style. So if you don't get a fighting style from your class or subclass, you can't take these. Now, I'm not sure these would be, you wouldn't want to take none of these have an associated ability score increase. So you wouldn't want to take these if you don't already have one until you max out your primary ability score. Then you might want to take these because some of these are quite good and can really add to whatever, to certain kinds of builds. Obviously, not all kinds of builds. So keep those in mind. So you either have to multi-class if you want one of these, or yeah, like that's literally what it comes down to. You got a multi-class either to get the class or subclass that gives you one of these. The archery fighting style. This one, it gives you a +2 bonus on attack rolls with ranged weapons, so it doesn't work with ranged spell attacks or other types of ranged attacks. So if you throw a melee weapon, this doesn't work for you. It has to be a ranged weapon. Now, interestingly enough, darts are both a ranged weapon and a thrown weapon. So there's some interesting combos there. This won't work with Eldritch Blast or other forms of spell attacks, unfortunately. But this is quite strong, very strong. It's not very often that you can just get a flat bonus to your attack rolls. It's pretty rare to get that. So this is very strong if this is your primary build, and if range attacks are not your primary build, I wouldn't take this. It's not worth spending your few options or few chances to get a fighting style on a secondary fighting approach. But this is quite good. I give it an A. Yeah, solid A for ranged builds. Next up, blind fighting. This gives you blind sight with a range of 10 feet. So this is kind of like so this one's interesting. In tier 1, I'd say this is a C, just because blind sight is not going to come up very often in a way that helps you. It's just going to be pretty rare. In tiers 2, and 3, it might be a B. It's a little less rare that that's going to come up. Especially in tier 3, it's going to start coming up more often where dark vision isn't enough and you need blind fighting for blind sight. Tier 4, this kind of becomes an A. In tier 4, that stuff's going to happen a lot, where there's cloud effects that block your vision and cause heavy obscurement. And 10 feet of blind sight is going to make a world of difference. So I'm going to give this one a B overall, kind of to average it out, but I would recommend not taking it in tier 1 and probably not even until levels, 6, 7, 8. It really depends on the kinds of monsters you're fighting and the DM and things like that. But it's right around there where this starts becoming more valuable. Now, the question at that point is it more valuable than your other fighting style that's going to always help you, right? Like archery. Archery is going to always help you if you're an ranged attacker build. And blind fighting isn't going to help you much with being a ranged attacker because it only has a range of 10 feet. Or let's see, great weapon fighting versus blind fighting. Great weapon fighting is pretty good and helps you all the time. When is the trade-off, right? That's going to be the trick for you, and you'll have to figure that out for yourself. Feel it out with how things are going with the campaign. And remember, you can switch your fighting style when you level up. So this works perfectly. So don't get this one early on. Switch to it later when it becomes more relevant on a level up. Now, blind fighting has some niche, like kind of very circumstantial value for different kinds of controllers and healers potentially, and support. because a lot of spells that you're casting in those categories require sight. Like you need to see your target, even if you're healing them. Like Healing Word requires sight. Now the range isn't very good, only 10 feet, and you'd have to multi-class to get this. So it's kind of a big stretch to make this worthwhile just for that. But depending on the campaign and the kinds of monsters you start to face, if they're always like hitting you with the magical darkness effect or a fog cloud and they have blind sight and you don't, this might be worth a multi-class to fighter for 1 level dip just to get that. Could be that valuable. It really depends on the campaign, so it's pretty circumstantial. But averaged out across all the tiers, I'm going to say this is a B across the board. It just depends, right? It's yeah, circumstantial or highly valuable, can go either way, and unfortunately can go either way by fight. Like in one fight, this is critical, and then your next 3 fights, it has no effect, and that's kind of the struggle with this one, kind of the bummer about it. But if your party builds around magical darkness, then you all need this, right? And that is a valid way to build a party. Anyway, B across the board. Defense fighting style. While you're wearing light, medium, or heavy armor, you get a +1 bonus to armor class. A +1 bonus to armor class doesn't sound like a lot, but it is. Because of the way that they've designed bounded accuracy into this version of Dungeons and Dragons, it's actually quite impactful. And a +1 bonus to your AC has a lot bigger effect than what you might assume. You might assume it's like a 5% difference of whether you're hit or not. And how much damage you're going to take. It is not a 5% difference on the damage you're going to take. It's more depending on what your AC is and what the monster's attack bonus is. It could increase or reduce the damage you're taking by 20%, 40%, 50%, right? If they only have a 10% chance to hit you and you take this, now they have a 5% chance to hit you, you just cut the damage you're taking in half. Now, if the damage you're taking before wasn't very high, then maybe you don't care that you're cutting it in half. Again, it really depends on how things are going, your party composition, and whether or not you need this, right? If you've got some strong healers in the party, maybe you don't need this as much as a tank or frontliner. If you don't have any healers, maybe this is more important for you, right? And it also depends on how tough the monsters are you're fighting, right? It comes down to a lot of circumstances. Overall, I'd say this is an A for tanks and frontliners. The defensive, because frontliners can go kind of defensive or offensive. Like you don't have any taunting, so you're not really a tank, but you can still be a fairly defensive frontliner with a sword and board. And if you're going defensive, this might be a good way to go. Or if you're going offensive, this is a very solid pick as an offensive frontliner because you're not going to have a shield, and this will help make up that difference. And is this better than great weapon fighting? It might be. It might be. Again, it depends. Same thing with like 2-weapon fighting. You don't have a hand for a shield, but you're 2-weapon fighting. Maybe you make up the difference with the defense fighting style. Anyway, solid option for both tanks and frontliners. And specifically, remember that these ranks, what I'm saying with these ranks on all of these feats is not that tanks and frontliners should take it, but rather this gives you a tank / frontliner type feature, improving your AC. And if whatever your build is, if you don't have enough, if you're like good enough in your role already and you want to diversify, this is a good way to diversify into a tank or frontliner type feature, right? Like you might want to get this as a skirmisher. If you find that you're getting stuck in melee too often, maybe you pick this fighting style just to help shore up your defenses to make you a little bit better of a frontliner because you keep getting stuck in the front lines and you're not successful at running in and running out all the time. The dueling fighting style. When you're holding a melee weapon in one hand and no other weapons, you gain a +2 bonus to damage rolls with that weapon. This one is interesting. It is one of the better fighting styles for increasing your damage. The problem is that it's a specific fighting style approach, right? Is that it buffs when you're fighting like only with one weapon. You don't have a second weapon. You can't have a heavy weapon. So if you're going sword and board, this is a solid damage increase, better than a lot of the other fighting styles for their relevant builds. Or if you're just fighting like with one weapon in one hand and you have no shield at all, this is a pretty solid damage boost. The reason why it's not, I think, rated more highly by more people is simply because that type of fighting or that type of build isn't a strong damage dealing build, right? Because there's not a lot of other ways to boost the damage with that kind of a build. If you're going sword and board, like your only damage boost is like this, and I guess you could go Hex or Hunter's Mark, but you're making less attacks than a 2-weapon fighter, so it's less valuable. Same thing if you're just going with like one weapon and no other shield or anything else, which might be like a rogue. And a rogue, this is even worse because rogues only ever make one attack. They never get extra attack. The only way they can get more attacks is by 2-weapon fighting, and this doesn't allow 2-weapon fighting. And this is not good for a rogue because it's only +2 damage to a single attack they're making. So unless you're some kind of like multi-class rogue who gets enough levels of something else to get extra attack, this is just not very good for rogues. Probably the best one, the one that this is best for, is like a fighter or a Pact of the Blade warlock who just gets a lot of attacks. When you're talking about adding 2 damage to 3 or 4 attacks, it really adds up. You're talking about, if you hit it with all of them, that's 6 DPR or 8 DPR. If you're a high level fighter, level 20 fighter and action surge, that's adding 2 damage to 8 attacks. And with the ways that, high level fighters can have just advantage on every attack, you might, you have a very high chance of just hitting with all of those. And that's 16 DPR. That is a huge increase. So this one's really good depending on like the specific build you have and the probably level you're at. It starts off, I don't know, kind of weak when you have very few attacks. This is probably one of the lower damage increases when you have only 1 attack. With extra attack, it's okay. It kind of averages out to be roughly equal to the damage increase you'd get on 2-weapon fighting for a 2-weapon fighting build. I do rank this as a tank option as well, because tanks are often, sword and board types. And this helps you be a tank because it just increases your threat on the battlefield, right? And that's not a numeric mechanic or anything like that that's tracked in the game. It's just if the DM is role-playing the monsters, as they should, as a team that's trying to beat the player characters, then they should be smart enough to know that, if this guy is super hard to hit and super hard to kill, like they have a ton of hit points and you're just not doing much damage to them, but they're also not doing anything to you, right? Their damage is low and they don't have like a big spell that's like hurting everybody or controlling your side, then you just ignore them, right? That's what the PCs would do, and the monster should act the same way. They should ignore the big, super hard to hit and kill person on the battlefield who's just not doing anything, right? Your threat is very low. So this increases your threat just so that they're less likely to ignore you as a tank. It's not nearly as much threat as like Spirit Guardians, though. So if you really want to pump up your threat, be a cleric tank. Anyway, it's different topic. Okay, so I give this a B for tanks, a B for frontliners, and a C for skirmishers. Because it can contribute to a skirmisher build. It's just not a great way to do it. Even if you're probably the best skirmisher who would want to, most likely skirmisher who's only going to be fighting with 1 weapon is like a rogue. But that's the one where I said, only 1 attack. This only gives you a +2 DPR. It's just not a good way to boost it. So it's maybe a C for skirmishers. There's probably some niche skirmisher builds who could really benefit from this, like a fighter who's a skirmisher. Great weapon fighting style. When you roll damage for an attack you make with a melee weapon that you were holding with 2 hands, you can treat it any 1 or 2 on a damage die as a 3. The weapon must have the 2-handed or versatile property to gain this benefit. All right, this one's interesting. A lot of people don't like it. It adds maybe 1 damage per hit, but it scales up higher and higher the more damage dice you have that are part of the weapon. So if you're fighting with a 2d6 type weapon, heavy weapon, then this actually adds like 2 damage per hit on average. And if you have additional properties, like magic properties that are part of the weapon, like a vicious, the vicious magic property, the wounding property, the flame tongue property, there's like a serpent blade one that adds a d6 of like acid, I think. So if you have any of those, this affects those as well, okay? So it's going to make all of those have a minimum damage roll, which means this adds up. So if you've got a flame tongue greatsword, your minimum damage roll for the weapon is now 12 plus your ability score modifier. And if you've got a vicious weapon, you're probably in tier 3, which means you should have had your ability score modifier maxed out, which means your minimum damage is 17 per hit. That's really good, really solid. The other thing is this prevents a lot of feel bad moments, like because it does apply to the damage die from a crit, right? So if you don't have this, I've seen quite a few crits that resulted in 2 1s on the damage die. So you've got a D12 weapon and you roll a 1 for the main, the regular damage roll, and a 1 for the crit roll, and then your ability score modifier, you just did 7 damage with your crit, which is less than your average damage. Like I've seen that so many times, which is a super big feel bad moment. Particularly because of the roller coaster, right? You crit, which is exciting, and then you roll damage that badly, and it just really sucks. And this would prevent that. This would make, if you only have that kind of a weapon and no, magical properties on it, that's still a minimum damage of like 10 or 11, right? You got a minimum of 3 on each of those damage dice, especially if it's a 2d6 weapon. Your minimum damage when you crit is now 12 plus your ability score modifier. or 6 if you're doing a D12 or D10 weapon. You do get more value out of this if it's 2d6 weapons, and you get more value out of it as you add more damage dice, like I said, from properties. So this might be one that you don't take if you're like a great axe fighter or a halberd or a glaive or things like that. Maybe you don't take this at low levels, but once you start getting additional damage dice from magical properties, this becomes a lot better, and I would maybe switch into it. The other thing to note is it specifically, we saw a sage advice on this one. It specifically doesn't work with anything else that adds to the attack. So this doesn't work on sneak attacks. It doesn't work on the damage from a divine smite or anything like that. It has to be the damage dice has to be intrinsically part of the weapon. Okay, the base weapon's damage dice plus magical properties on the weapon. That's pretty much what it's limited to. I still think it's worthwhile. I think this is a solid one. Good for frontliners. Solid for skirmishers if you're doing like a skirmisher with a reach. You build a skirmisher with a reach weapon, so you're going to run in and out. Still solid value for that. I only gave it a C because it's a niche type of build. You don't see those kind of skirmishers very often. Might even be good if you're like a tank who's not using a shield and you just want to increase your threat. I've seen a number of barbarian tanks like that. So if you're that kind of a tank, this is still good for you, increasing your damage, increasing your threat. And by the way, that is a great combo for fun, right? If you've got like somebody in the party who just loves the idea of being a healer, I would go with a two-handed weapon wielding tank, right? Because you're just going to get hit more often, which is fun. And you're going to do more damage, right? So it's fun that you're doing more damage, and it's going to be more fun for the healer that you're taking more damage. Like they're going to feel more valuable, like feeling like I'm keeping the tank alive, and you're going to be like just killing them with your damage, all the damage you're dealing out as a tank. I would probably only try this as a barbarian, right? Because then at least you have rage to give you resistance to most of the damage. But still, that's going to make the healer feel great. You're going to have a good time. That's a great combo. The Interception fighting style. When a creature you can see hits another creature within 5 feet of you with an attack roll, you can use a reaction to reduce the damage dealt to the target by 1d10 plus your proficiency bonus. You must be holding a shield or a simple or martial weapon to use this reaction. All right, so this one is one where you're trying to be tanky or have a tank type feature, but let's say you are the barbarian who wants to fight with a great axe, right? So you're a weapon, a heavy weapon wielding tank. Okay, you can't use the protection fighting style if you don't have a shield. That one requires a shield. This one only requires a weapon or a shield. So you could still have a tank type feature, and that's what this is, right? You're going to punish the enemies for attacking other people besides you. All right. And this one is decent in tier 1, right? Especially when you have low hit points, monsters are not doing very much damage either, and you want to protect your allies. You want to be the tank. And you don't have any other source of any other use for your reaction. This might be, in that situation, an A. But by the time you can take Sentinel or do anything else that gives you a better reaction, I would swap this out, which is probably around level 4, level 5. You would want to swap this out. I would swap it out anyway, probably around that time, just because 1d10 plus your proficiency bonus is just not very much damage. Monsters are going to be doing like, 10 to 20 damage per hit at CRs 1 through 4. Their damage really scales up, and you're going to block half of that on average, half or a quarter of that. So the value of this just really goes down. So I would swap that out and not even try to prevent the damage anymore, because it's just not worth your reaction. If you can get Sentinel and punish them by making another attack roll, that is far more effective. So this one is one you want to swap out early, like I said, around levels 4 or 5. But before that, could be pretty useful if you are trying to be a tank who doesn't have a shield. Specifically, it's a tank without a shield. So I'd give it a C overall. That's because it's like D, it's like probably A tier in A ranked feat for tanking in tier 1. Probably drops to a C in tier 2 and a D for tiers 3 and 4. And again, no, I don't think I'd say it's an A in tier 1, because it's only a certain kind of build, and that's the build specifically of a tank who doesn't have a shield. If you're a tank who doesn't have a shield, then this is an A for you. Take all that together, average it out, because you got to give it one rank so that this isn't too complex, and I say it's a C overall. The protection fighting style. Okay, when a creature you can see hits a target other than you that is within 5 feet of you, you can take a reaction to interpose your shield if you're holding one. You impose disadvantage on the triggering attack roll and all other attack rolls against the target until the start of your next turn if you remain within 5 feet of the target. So in 2014, this was a terrible fighting style, even for a tank. I ranked it a D. And I ranked this one a D just a few months ago, and that's because I didn't realize they changed it. So that the thing they changed is that that last half of that sentence is where they say, and all other attack rolls against the target until the start of your next turn if you remain within 5 feet of the target. So this went from being terrible to, as far as fighting style goes, this is an A ranked tank feat. Okay. It's now almost as good as like the soft taunt. The subclasses get a soft taunt feature. It's almost as good. The only reason this isn't completely as good is it only applies to one ally, right? You choose one ally, and that's the ally who gets the benefit. With those soft taunt features, it's a debuff you put on the enemy, and it applies to all of your allies. But as far as fighting styles go, this is a solid A ranked feat for tanking. It does require a shield though, so you can't use it on a tank build where you're going to be fighting with a two-handed weapon. You must be holding a shield for this one. So yeah, this one's great, very solid. Thrown weapon fighting style. When you hit with a ranged attack roll using a weapon that has the thrown property, you gain +2 damage, +2 bonus to the damage roll. All right, so this must be a thrown weapon, and there is one ranged weapon that has the thrown property. That's the dart. All other thrown weapons are melee weapons. And note that this says a ranged attack roll with a weapon with a thrown property. So yes, it does apply. It's not restricted to ranged weapons, only ranged attack rolls. So any of your melee weapons that you can throw, this applies to it. And if you want to be like a thrown build damage dealer, ranged damage dealer, this one is very good for you. The problem is that that's kind of a rare build, and those builds have high taxes, high feat taxes, because if you want to maximize your damage output with those, you need this, because thrown weapons just on average do less damage than ranged weapons, right? The short bow has a better range than all of your thrown weapons, and it does a d6 damage. And d6 is more than most of the thrown weapons. There's like the trident that you can throw for a d8, right? And it has a range of 20-60. So terrible range on that one. Okay, so you got to get this. You'd probably want the archery fighting style, so you need 2 fighting style feats. Then you want sharpshooter to remove cover. And then you want bomber feat, the new bomber feat, so that you can throw them at your long range without disadvantage. Otherwise, you're throwing at, your range is 20 feet at disadvantage between 21 feet and 60 feet. And 20 feet is just not enough to be a decent range damage dealer. So you've got to have all 4 of those feats to really pull this off and be a solid damage dealer with thrown weapons, which you can do, right? A champion fighter could do that. They get 2 fighting styles, plus they have extra feats. So a champion fighter can totally do this. If you're trying to build this with any other class other than a fighter, you have to multi-class to get 2 feats, or you got to spend a regular to get 2 fighting style feats, or you've got to spend a regular feat option to get another fighting style that don't have any ability score increases. So it's kind of rough, right? There's just only a few ways to be a solid thrown weapon damage dealer. So I give this a C because it's circumstantial among all the builds. But if you're going to be that ranged damage dealer, ranged thrown damage dealer, this is it. You do need to take this, and it's an A for that specific build. It's just a niche circumstantial build. The 2-weapon fighting style. When you make an extra attack as a result of using a weapon that has the light property, you can add your ability's modifier to the damage of that attack if you aren't already adding it to the damage. All right, so 2-weapon fighting got a lot better in 2024, so that's good with the Nick weapon mastery. And this increases the damage of that attack. That attack of let's call it your offhand attack, because you can either get it through the light weapon property or the dual wielder feat, which is 2 different things, okay? You can get it either way, but the attack has to be made with a light weapon, and the extra attack you're getting, or one of those attacks, has to be a light weapon. I'm trying not to make it too complex. And light weapons top out at D6. Okay, so you're talking about a D6 in damage max or a D4, and if you don't have this, then it's just that D6 or D4, which means it's an average of 2.5 or 3.5 damage, which isn't worth 2-weapon fighting. If you get this, you're talking about adding +3 to +5 to that damage, which more than doubles it on average. Okay, so if you want to be a 2-weapon fighter, this is really important. You might be thinking like, oh, it's just one attack. Adding 3, 4, or 5 damage to one attack isn't worth it. It really is, right? What it really comes down to is that trying to get that extra attack isn't worth it if you don't have this, because it's just not enough damage to make it worth it. Now, that there's some things that change that, what I just said, and that is if your offhand attack weapon has one of those properties, vicious, magic properties, vicious weapon, wounding weapon, um, flame tongue, it's an extra 2d6. That changes it from being just a basic 2.5 to 3.5 damage to all of a sudden it's like triple that now, or more than triple if it's a d4 weapon. So that's worth it to fight with if you don't have this. This still is a big damage increase, so I would still get this. The other ones who may not really care that much about this are rogues, right? And with rogues, it's worthwhile to get to do 2-weapon fighting, just so you have another attack, because you're just trying to land that sneak attack. So you don't actually care that much about the damage your base weapon is doing. You just need more chances to land your sneak attack. So for rogues, you don't really need this. And it's probably not worth like multi-classing just so you can get a fighting style to get this, so you can like dual wield better, right? That's not worth it. I would still just use, with a rogue, you still get your weapon mastery. So I would still use 2-weapon fighting, get the nick mastery, weapon with a nick mastery, and 2-weapon fight for that, just for the extra chance to land your sneak attack. The classic combo for rogues is short sword for Vex to give yourself advantage on the next attack, and then scimitar, and you take weapon mastery with both. Now you have Vex to give yourself advantage. You have a second attack with the scimitar on your action, so you still haven't used your bonus action yet, and now you've self-activated your sneak attack no matter where your allies are placed, and no matter the situation, or at least you've given yourself a chance at it, because the advantage attack could still miss. So this is an A for frontliners, an A for skirmishers, and a C for ranged, because it can apply to ranged, but only certain kinds of thrown weapon builds, right? It can't be the dart, because the dart isn't light. But you could do daggers, hand axe. I don't think hand axes are light. Light hammers are light, so it's like daggers and light hammers, and I think like one or two others that have the thrown property and are light. So you could 2-weapon fight with those and get another attack and still add this to the damage. So a C for that, because it's a niche build. The unarmed fighting style. When you hit with an unarmed strike and deal damage, you can deal bludgeoning damage equal to 1d6 plus your strength modifier instead of the normal damage of an unarmed strike, which is 1. No damage die at all. It's just a 1. If you aren't holding any weapon or a shield when you make the attack roll, the d6 becomes a d8. At the start of each of your turns, you can deal 1d4 bludgeoning damage to one creature grappled by you. So this is all right, so I'll give this a C overall, C for tanks and C for frontliners, but only because it doesn't apply to most builds, right? You have to be an unarmed fighting build and not be a monk. If you're a monk, this isn't worth it. You'd have to multi-class to get it. That's not worth it. Even though it's a small damage boost, right? Because monks start off with a D6 with their unarmed strikes, but by 5th level, they're doing D8s. So this would give you a D8 early on if you multi-class and take this. I don't think that's worth multi-classing. It's better to just go straight monk, because they have so many features that are powerful that are dependent on the monk level. So you got to get monk levels as fast as you can. So for everyone else who wants to be like a pugilist boxer type fighter, martial, I don't mean the fighter specifically, yeah, this is now an A for you, right? If you're going to be an unarmed fighter, an unarmed martial, you definitely want this. Barbarians particularly would like that approach, but they don't get fighting style. So a barbarian to get this would have to multi-class. But yeah, paladins can now smite with unarmed strikes, so you might be an unarmed paladin fighter. That would be an interesting build to see. You could do this with ranger too. You'd have to be a strength-based ranger, because the damage is based on your strength instead of your dexterity. Only monks get that. So this is like for niche builds, but for those niche builds, this is quite strong, especially a grappler type tank build where you're going to get the grappler feat, street justice, the new street justice feat. Take both of those and get this. You're gonna have some decent damage options, but also some strong effects, some strong tanking effects where they can't move once you've got them grappled. And yes, I still maintain, if you're not holding anything in both hands, so you can use both hands to grapple. You can grapple the same creature twice. The condition doesn't stack, but the source, you can apply the same condition with multiple sources. And reading the rules of the grappled condition, it says when they break out of it, it is referring to the grapple of the hand. You must have a hand, and when they escape, they break the grapple of that hand. That's how it looks like to me. I can see how people read it other ways, but why not? If you can read it both ways, why not be slightly more generous in favor of the player who's built this thing, who's built the character specifically to be a grappler? Let them just be a little better grappler. It's not a super common build, and if they want to lean into it and be that kind of a tank, great. Let them have fun. I don't know. That's how I interpret it. I know there's a few people out there who don't agree. Yeah, I'm sorry for your grapplers if you're the DM for them, I guess. But yeah, this is an A ranked feat for grapple builds and a D for everyone else, right? You do not want to spend your fighting style feat on this unless you're a grappler, unless you're an unarmed fighter. Sorry, unarmed martial specifically. So yeah, I'm going to give it a C overall just to kind of average it out because it is a circumstantial build. But yeah, solid for when you need it. And that is all the fighting style feats from the player's handbook. So I hope this was worthwhile. I'm going to start into the general feats tomorrow. That's going to be a multi-part one, otherwise it'd be way too long. And thanks for watching. Catch you next time. And remember to be cool when you play D&D because these people are your friends, or at least they're potential friends. And we could always use more friends. So be cool when you play D&D. It's for fun.